Welcome, everybody. My name is Rachel Allen. I'm a professor of humanities here on the East Campus, and I work with a lot of people in the room here on the Peace and Justice Initiative here at Valencia College, and we've given you some information about the initiative. Today we're here because we sent a team of faculty and an administrator to Notre Dame University in June to their Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. Notre Dame has one of the premier institutes of peace studies, I would say, in the world, certainly in the United States. And they're very generous with their program in offering it up to institutions throughout the United States on how to build a peace studies program in your own institution. We had our first visit to Kroc in 2009. We sent a team in 2010, and then we sent a fantastic team here this June. This gathering here today is to hear their impressions of Kroc, peace studies in general, what they think that we might do with peace studies here at Valencia, and how we might grow the work of the Peace and Justice Initiative here at our college. So we're really excited to be here today. I'd like to introduce my colleague, James McDonald, who will be presenting today. This is Lee Thomas, who will be presenting, and then where's Terry? And this is Terry Miller, who will also be presenting what he learned at Kroc. Dr. Judy Addleston went as well. She's a professor of psychology, and she's not able to present with us here this morning. But without further ado, also I just want to acknowledge everyone that's in the room. Thank you for being here, the students from Mark Logus course that are here, faculty from other campuses that are here to support our work. Paul Chapman, our Peace Studies teacher from Osceola, is here. So if you all want to ask questions about the Peace Studies course, he's here for you to answer those questions. And just everyone, thank you for being here today. All right, so we're going to start with Lee Thomas, who's the Dean of Social Sciences.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, come on. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I've had my coffee. Come on. I'm Lee Thomas. I am a relative newcomer to Valencia College, and I freely admit I'm a relative newcomer to Peace and Justice Studies. I was invited to attend Kroc this year at University of Notre Dame with my colleagues. Good to see you again, by the way. And had a great time, learned a lot, but I can tell you that have you ever done something where you started into it thinking, oh, this is going to be, this is going to be nice, it'll be educational, I'll walk away with this, and, I'll walk away, I'll pick up a little, I'll glean a little bit from it, and that'll be the end of it. You ever done that before you go to a meeting or something? If that is your purpose and intent, don't go to Kroc, because you'll walk away from Kroc really wondering about what just happened to me, what experience did I just go through, and you will not be able to stop thinking about it. And so having left Kroc and come back, it's been on my mind since I remember getting back in the car, going back and catching the plane back. And a little bit about me, I'm a pragmatist, it's my thought process, and I'm kind of a realist, and I'm a psychologist and a teacher educator. So it takes me a while to process things, and I pick things apart. But I'll tell you that I'm still picking apart and still processing on a lot of what I was exposed to at Kroc. So I'd like to share a little bit of that with you, some things, and we'll tell you that I don't know everything about peace or justice. I thought I knew a lot, and then I went to this meeting, and my colleagues here taught me that they knew a lot more than I did, I think, and I think we all discovered as a group that there were other people who knew a whole lot more than we did. But I'll tell you that I'm a learner, and I'm someone who's a student of this, and I'm learning more. So if you'll give me that opportunity. There we go. Some personal introspection. I came back from this meeting, and some questions really stuck in my mind. And if you go to a meeting like this, or if you get into Peace and Justice Studies, you're going to start asking yourself a variety of questions. One of the questions that came to my mind was, why are peace and justice studies important? really, why are they important? Aren't we already talking about peace and justice enough? You know, those are the kind of questions that were going through my mind. Do I really need to go to an institute, to a meeting, and learn more about peace and justice? What do I know about peace? And I thought I knew quite a bit about peace, and I do know something about peace. But I learned that there's so much more out there than I thought that I knew. What do I know about justice? What do I think about justice? There's so many facets of justice. There's so many components of justice. You know, I might think of justice as that's what a police officer does, right? And some of my police colleagues were there. They talked about justice, and I might think of justice as being equity being thrown in there somewhere. But there's so much more to justice. What about social justice? And what is social justice? And that leads into other things about what do I believe as a human being is just. How do peace and justice studies apply to me as a dean? In other words, what relevancy is this? When my campus president looks at me and goes, I sent you to Croc, what did you get out of this? What am I going to be able to say to my dean, to my colleague deans about how can I use this in my daily job in working with students and working with faculty? Then how do peace and justice studies apply to me as an educator? Well, I consider myself a professor first. So, and I still try to teach from time to time. So I asked myself that, how does this plug into me as a teacher, as a psychologist? When I teach my psychology classes, where am I teaching peace and justice? Am I teaching peace and justice? Should I be teaching peace and justice? And then finally, how do peace and justice apply to me as a citizen? And the last question here is one that I think a lot of people forget. They leave off. Because we are citizens. What I do affects you, right? The way I live my life and conduct myself in society affects you. The way that you live your life and conduct yourself in society affects me. We're all really tied together. There were some things that came out of Croc that were meaningful to me, and I'm not going to go through all these. I'm not going to give you a lecture on all these because, first of all, I'm not really equipped to give you a lecture on all these. I'm not an expert. But some terms that came out of these that were very meaningful to me and that I'm still exploring. So will you give me that? Conflict transformation. Love this idea of taking conflict and transforming it into something that is more of a win-win situation. Like I'm beginning to discover, well, I've known for a while, but I'm discovering more and more that I've been doing a lot of this as a dean for a long time, as an administrator for a long time. As a professor, I've been doing this for a long time. As a citizen who's been involved with community service and community activities for a long time, I've been doing conflict transformation for quite a while. Negotiation. We think we know what negotiation means, right? But until you're the negotiator, right? Right? You ever been the negotiator of something? I grew up in a family where, I'm kind of a missionary kid, and for whatever reason in my family, I guess it's the first order child or whatever, I was the negotiator in my family. So I thought I knew a lot, but as I've gotten older, I've learned more and more about negotiation, and I've picked up a lot of some of the information I've gleaned from going to Croc has helped me in my job in terms of negotiating things between faculty and students, and between students and students. It's been very helpful to me. Strategic peace building. I have to tell you that my colleagues will tell you, I had a rant and rave while I was at Croc because one of our presenters talked about strategic peace building, and I think they spent, an hour? Was it an hour? Talking about conflict resolution, conflict transformation. Then we had 10 minutes left, and they went through strategic peace building in about 10 minutes, and I think they left off some very important parts to strategic peace building. And as a result, I walked away from the meeting that day, I'm not sure I buy into strategic peace building. I'm not sure I buy into the idea of the concept the way it was presented. But it put a spark in my mind about going back and doing some more reading and seeing how this would be applicable to me. And I really like the concept, and I encourage those of you who are interested in peace studies, Google it. Look it up, read through it, and by the way, when you Google things or when you go look things up on the internet, don't just take one source. We know that, right? Look at a variety of sources, look for common themes, look for commonalities. But I do like the idea now of strategic peace building. I'm beginning to recognize now, the more I learn, the more I study what was presented to me at Croc, I'm learning here that this word strategic is important, just as peace building is. Strategic means both parties want it, right? It's planned. Both parties want peace. Okay? So I've been implementing that kind of in what I do as a dean. Wherever I have conflict, I look for what peace do both parties want, what resolution are they looking for. I ask those kinds of questions now. And it's amazing, a lot of times I'm finding, because I'm asking that question, that both parties want the same thing. Equity, honest communication. I feel like I have a master's in counseling, so I feel like I've been doing a lot of communicating for a long time, but I'm finding in working with people that honest communication, I'm doing more and more of it. Some of the things I've held back on in the past, I'm opening up a little bit more in terms of communicating, and I'm finding that it's making me a better communicator, a better listener. And communication, by the way, is it a one-way thing or two-way thing? Two-way, right. You talk and you also do what? You listen, proceed. And the other person talks and they also do what? So I found, in kind of going through this and looking at communications, one of the questions I ask myself as I've been communicating is, am I listening enough? I'm talking a lot, but am I listening enough? So I've tried to listen quite a bit more. And in doing so, I've learned things. And I've had people share things with me that they would not have shared with me otherwise. And being a relative newcomer here in a position where we haven't had a dean for quite a while, I don't know if you know much about social sciences PE. We went for quite a while without a dean, had quite a number of interims. There were quite a few issues in social sciences PE, and people were ready to communicate, but they wanted to know that you were willing to listen and ready to listen to. So I've been doing a lot of that. Appreciation of diversity. I'm going to tell you straight up that I don't know everything there is about diversity, nor will I ever know everything there is about diversity. I'm not an expert in diversity. I'm a learner. I'm a student of diversity. And I will continue to be that way, but I do have an appreciation of diversity. I've learned so much by opening my mind and being receptive to other people and being willing to learn. And people I find are very happy to teach you. If you'll share with me, I don't know, or I don't understand, or I'd like to know more. Empathizing. I feel like, and I'll throw the last one in there too, sensitivity to the needs of others. Putting all these together, all the meaningful learning that came out of this to me, what's happened with me as a dean and as an educator and as a concerned citizen here is I've become more deliberative. Going to Croc has made me much, much more deliberative. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Well, about every day as a dean, you get student issues which cross your desk. Okay? Just give you one simple little example here. I had a student who made contact with me, made a phone call to me the other day that said, hey, my professor, I talked with my professor, I tried to submit an assignment inside Blackboard, and I couldn't do it. I could not do it. I tried and I tried and I tried and I could not do it. And my professor has a strict clause in their syllabus that says, if you don't submit something by the deadline, it's an automatic 0. So what do you think the professor had done to the student who didn't make the deadline? Automatic 0, right? And that follows the syllabus, right? So the student said, you know, at first glance, as a dean, if you're not deliberative, if you're not doing these things, if you're not thinking things through, if you're not giving people the benefit of the doubt, if you're not empathizing, if you're not honestly communicating, if you're not thinking about fairness and equity, you might go, oh, no, there's a syllabus, you didn't make the deadline, too bad. Deal with it. But I thought it was funny at the time. Rachel, I had this little card that's on the center table here. I keep this on my desk, and I glanced at this card. And I do that because it's a reminder to me to constantly ask more questions and to listen more. So I said to the student, why couldn't you submit it in Blackboard? She said, well, the system was down. Now, do you think that's important?
Yeah.
Now, she didn't tell me that, right? She just said she couldn't submit it through Blackboard. She didn't say what? The system was down. Now, I started thinking, well, okay, let me get your phone number, let me get your information. So I did. I called OIT. I had the date and time that the student said that she was on the system. I called OIT, and I said, was the system down during this day and during this time period? And OIT said, let me call you back. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. OIT said, yes, the system was down during that day and time. It was up and down, up and down. There's no way the student could have uploaded something during that time. And we even have a record that she did try to access the system several times. So I emailed the professor. I said, will you send that to me in a statement? And I emailed that statement, forwarded it to the professor. And I said, would you reconsider? Would you think about this again? I didn't tell the professor she had to accept the assignment. I just asked her, would you reconsider? And of course, she did. Glad that she did. That's one example of how what I've learned at Kroc and how I'm putting the things I've learned in practice, and it makes me a better dean. It makes me a better listener. It makes me a better person to reach out to students. It makes me a better leader to my faculty. I make better decisions that are more fair, if you will, that are more equitable, and that respond to human needs. Okay? But had I just not been deliberative, I would have just said, boom, you violated the syllabus, in the discussion, you get a 0. Thank you. Some other applications, throw this out here. I know in social sciences PE, we have faculty who are working on courses. Judy Addleston, who's not able to be with us today, is working on a class called Psychology of Peace. I'm very interested in seeing that class come forward. I know Rachel and I have talked about a bus trip to different sites. You may want to elaborate that about later on some of the things we've thought about. She may not want to. Some other things that have come out of this too. This has been a really affirming process for me because it's made me realize the things I was already doing, that contributed to peace and justice in our community and in our college, and working with students and working with faculty. It was very affirming. Maybe, we need to be affirmed, don't we? Mm-hmm. We're criticized a lot, but it's nice to be affirmed once in a while. It's also made me, as a dean, take a closer look at what we teach, how we teach, and why we teach it. I've had the unique opportunity to sit in classes for every one of my full-time faculty and many of my adjuncts. And I've noticed in many classes, we talk about war. We talk about war. We talk about it all the time. But are we spending a lot of time, too, talking about the things that people did to avert war? Are we talking about things that could have been done or possibly could have been done? Are we exploring things that could have been done that could have led to peace? Are we even having those conversations? And when we bring that up, do red flags go up? Do people feel threatened about that? And if they do, why? Why? Integrating best practices into our employee and student relations. I've taken a lot of what I've learned and I try to integrate that into my employee relations and to working with our students. I can tell you already we've made some huge strides in social sciences PE in a short period of time, in a division that was had many challenges, let's just put it that way, ahead of us. We've made some huge strides because we're doing some of these things. I'm very proud of, I see some of my colleagues here who are on an adjunct development committee on which we're working together. And it's kind of an initiative that we're doing together as a team. We take our hats off. We're not dean, we're not full-time faculty, we're not part-time faculty, we're just faculty. Working together for the good of students and the benefit of students and the benefit of our colleagues. Also, in terms of employee relations and student relations, I'll tell you, it's been wonderful, wonderful, wonderful to take the time and to listen. I've learned so much. Organizations are like onions, just like I mentioned to Rachel yesterday. Often what's on the outside skin of an organization is not truly what the organization is about. It's not the essence of the organization. You have to peel that outside layer out and get into some of the deeper layers to really figure out an organization. So it's been helpful there. Looking for new opportunities for new learning, exploration, and growth. I told you this whole process got me thinking, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. Doggone it. You know, it's bad. It's bad and it's good. You know, I find myself, I'm Googling about different things. That's when you know something has impacted you, when you start Googling a lot about it and asking questions. I guess that's a litmus test, you know. Did this really affect me? If I find myself Googling about it a lot and asking a lot of questions and doing a lot of eclectic readings, so I keep 5 or 6 books going around the house, and Rachel asked me yesterday, "What are you reading?" I was like, "Please don't ask me that question." You know, because what I'm reading, what I'm reading on the internet and what I'm reading everywhere, it's not enough. I want to know more. And finally, I would say to you, out of all of this, something else that's been very affirming to me as a dean and as a faculty member and as a citizen, just as one of you, as one of us, I think, what good is our peace and justice studies if we don't put them in motion? Put your beliefs in motion. Discover what it is that you believe. You know, I'm not going to tell you today that everything is negotiable, because it's not. Right? And some people who jump into studying peace and justice studies as a psychologist, I've noticed that's one of the first things that people jump to, going, "Oh, everything's not negotiable." No, it's not. We all have lines that we have to draw, right? Our law enforcement people too. We talked about that. You have lines that police officers have to draw, right? You personally have things you believe, right? Lines that you draw that you're not willing to go beyond. But part of this is the exploration of what those lines are. And I'm finding a lot of people have never taken the time. We're so busy making a living. We're so busy going to school that we never discover what those lines are. So as a result, we cross those lines sometimes. And we regret it. So this is an iterative process. I believe in taking what I'm doing and putting it to work. I know I'm getting back. I'm a newcomer to Orlando, but I'm beginning to get involved civically again. And I hope you will too. And I think that if you do get involved in the peace and justice studies, if you do get involved in what's going on here at Valencia, I can tell you, your mind's not going to be able to rest. If you have any interest at all in peace and justice, any interest at all in social justice and equity and fairness, your mind is not going to be able to rest, because these topics come up constantly in every facet of your life. And you're going to get involved because you can't help it. So, thanks, Rachel. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
There's my email address and phone number if you'd like to grab a cup of coffee sometime. My office is next door if you'd like to come by. People do it all the time, so please make use of that. Look forward to it.
All right. Thank you, Lee. James and Terry came to Kroc from the Criminal Justice Division, and they're going to share with us what they learned and what they're bringing back to the college. James, you want to start?
Yeah, I want to pass out something real quick. That's right. Like Rachel said, my name is James McDonald. I'm faculty here. I'm program chair for the Criminal Justice Technology program. And Terry is one of our esteemed faculty who's been here 15 years, I guess. Former program chair. I will tell you, Terry and I, we do share a common background. We both have worked in law enforcement in the past. We've both been in the military. But we're very different. Terry, I think, is the passion of the program. I'm the nerd. Okay, which is why I'm up here formally presenting, because that's what nerds do, right? Though I'm not sure if I'm a nerd or a geek, I kind of get this.
Is this feedback from Kroc too?
Yeah. We did have some lively discussions, comparing and contrasting our experiences.
The geeks together. Good.
And I apologize in advance for my cough. I have some sort of infection going on. So, I don't think I'm contagious. So all right, Kroc. When the email first went out asking for people who are interested in attending this event at Notre Dame, I saw it come across my desk, and I was very excited about it because I thought, peace, wow. Like Lee mentioned, I don't formally know a lot about peace. I know I like it, okay, but I couldn't tell you much about peace. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to go and learn more about peace, and always lurking in the back of my mind, I always wanted to find a way to elevate policing as a profession. Okay, I know it's viewed oftentimes as more of a vocation. All right, the police officers are sort of these robotic beings that go out there and enforce the law, sort of objectively and maybe not without a lot of deliberative thought. And so I thought bringing peace into this might be a way to sort of elevate policing as a profession, and also help it better develop a level of trust and fairness among the community. So anyway, that's what I was hoping to get out of it, and also learn a little bit too. So I will tell you something about me in particular. I already told you I'm kind of a nerd, all right? And I'm also a doer, okay? So if you send me somewhere, okay, and if one of the goals is to bring peace studies into an AS degree program, okay, I'm going into it thinking, okay, how do I make that happen? All right, I'm going to row that direction. Okay, and there will probably be headwinds and all these obstacles I'm going to have to face, but that's the direction I'm going, unless told otherwise. And so, what I'm going to talk about really isn't so much what I got out of Kroc, because I think Lee pretty much did a good job of summarizing what we got out of Kroc. I'm going to tell you what I've done since I've been back from Kroc, and that is creating a course, and we're going to call it Peace, Conflict, and the Police, okay, that brings together peace studies and policing. Okay. When we went to Kroc, like Rachel had mentioned, other people had been there before us, and they had sort of laid the groundwork, all right? Phase 1 and Phase 2, we'll call it. We considered ourselves to be part of this Phase 3, this continuing evolution of this Peace and Justice Initiative. Going in, we thought what would be best in order to get this program really off the ground and flourishing, it's already off the ground, but flourishing, would be to disaggregate. Okay, rather than developing a program that's self-sustaining on its own, within its own department or whatever, we thought, well, let's create it more like a network, okay, where we have core components, but yet we have these affiliates out there. The affiliates could be different programs within the college. They develop their own peace curriculum, independent, keeping in mind certain core topics that need to be covered in any sort of peace studies type course. And one of the goals that had been established for peace studies was to bring in the AS degree programs. And so as you can see here, and this isn't a complete list, all right, but business could be one. How can business contribute to peace? And we'll talk a little bit more about peace later, but there's two different types of peace, negative and positive. But how can it contribute to peace? Criminal justice, I'm going to get into that. Nursing was one. Okay, that's a partnership or relationship that's already developing. But then you have your AA programs or your disciplines within AA. Psychology, which of course Lee talked a little bit about and what Judy's doing there. Humanities, of course, which Rachel's doing right there. Political science, and I didn't mention history, but history can be included in that as well. All right, I wasn't sure if Carl was going to be here. I was going to toss that out for him. But so anyway, this is sort of the model we developed as a basis for phase 3 and where we're going right now. Now, conflict in the police, does that really exist? I like Dilbert. Anyone here familiar with Dilbert?
Yes.
I think Dilbert's great. And I think this cartoon sort of captures sort of the image I think we have of the police here. Dilbert gets pulled over. He's a little upset. Why are you pulling me over for a U-turn? I pay your taxes. And oh, by the way, I don't like your mustache. So the police officer asks him to get out and do a field sobriety test. And apparently a field sobriety test involves launching yourself down an embankment. Okay? Voluntarily, of course. That's kind of the image that a lot of people have of the police. That's really not what the police are supposed to be about. The police have a difficult job. Okay? They are the visible manifestation of government authority. Okay? And for that reason alone, the mere presence of the police involves conflict. And that's by design. You look at the uniform, the symbols they wear, the gun. Okay, that all implies a level of conflict. Okay? But second, they're also an important social institution that's affected by external and internal forces. Okay, so the way the police behave oftentimes isn't deliberate. It's not like they sit around and go, you know what, I'm going to throw this guy down an embankment. There's forces that contribute to that. Okay? So we'll talk a little bit about that too. Yeah, it's called gravity. Okay, the police, how do they fit into this? I created this little model to sort of relate the police to conflict and nonviolence. All right. Now, in peace studies, of course, peace is a central topic. Okay. Other related topics include conflict. Right. The police engage in conflict. I already talked about that. The police also have a very important role in resolving conflict. Okay. That's a big part of what they do. All right. Resolving conflict, and also nonviolence. Of course, the uniform projects violence. Okay, let's face it, you bring a gun in, that's projection of violence. Okay, a billy club, a taser. Okay, but believe it or not, the police emphasize nonviolence whenever possible. Okay, that's what they're supposed to do. That's what good officers do. And that's what good organizations do. All right, when dealing with conflict. You should look through this nonviolence lens first, using violence as a last resort. Okay, so that's how the police kind of fit in all this. And ultimately what they're trying to do, okay, is establish order. Now, order and peace are not the same thing. But if you establish order, hopefully in a democratic society, you'll develop peace. Okay, positive peace. So we'll talk about it. Now, in developing this class, I told you I didn't know a lot about peace. So I felt like I had to do a lot of reading to learn more about peace. And I went through a book list and I identified Peace and Conflict Studies. Is this the textbook you use?
It's the blue one.
The blue one?
That's on the bottom.
The blue one's great because it contains a bunch of excerpts on different essays and whatnot that have been written by important people, famous people in this here. So I read parts of this. Conflict Transformation, I read this, and that was very good. What was great about it, at the end of it, he actually uses a policing example to illustrate conflict transformation and use. And then Just Policing, Not War. This book, I haven't read the entire thing yet. I've only read parts of it. But they talk about community-oriented policing as being a model to use for dealing with conflict, more on an international scale than a local scale. So I read through these books, and based on what I read and what I learned at Kroc, I learned a lot in a very short period of time, I was able to identify some core categories for developing the major topics. Okay, because ultimately what I want to do is develop this into a course with a course number. All right, so I have to do this in Course Outline Builder. That's the practical nerd part of it. Okay, in order to deliver this course, make it part of a program, this is the sort of the administrative part that needs to be completed. So one of the categories was peace. All right, and these are topics that fall under peace. Now, I may not have been completely accurate in how I decided to categorize everything, but these are sort of the general sort of guideline for me to use. What is peace? Okay, I think it's important for a professor, and I'm sure you know this, to talk to your students about what's their conception of peace. peace and justice are these two loaded words where you think you know what it is until you talk to people about it, and then you realize, wow, you're from Mars, I'm from Venus. We have completely different conceptions of what justice is or what peace is. What was great about Kroc, another plug, is that you meet a lot of people from different colleges, people who have had different experiences, and I met a professor from the Congo who told me in her experience in the Congo that the experience she had was very different from what I would expect. The people there, they didn't want peace, at least in her experience, because they actually profited, many people profited from conflict. Okay, and that's sad. All right, and that's sad. So peace means different things to different people, and it's important for us to know that, and it's important for us to talk to our students about that. So that's one. The next one was conflict. There's a lot there. I'm not going to get into all of it. Conflict's critically important. Conflict ranges on a continuum from war between states to conflict between siblings. I have a 5- and a 3-year-old. Trust me, I see conflict on a daily basis. All right? But it's this vast continuum. We need to talk about that. All right? And the police are engaged in conflict, like I said. So we need to talk about that. Some things I learned, which I think are interesting, I want to kind of pull in to policing, just war theory. Okay, I want to talk about that. It's sort of this ethical vehicle that's used to justify war. And it's frequently manipulated and abused, and I want to talk about that too. But at the bottom, I want to really tie these into policing, because when you look at violence in policing, a lot of these bulleted lists or issues down here come into play. For instance, small group decision making. Okay, groups tend to be less moral than individuals. Okay, how does that contribute to police violence? Fundamental attribution error. Okay, you know what this is. It's still a psychological term. Okay, misreading what someone else is doing by substituting your beliefs. Okay, ideology. Ideology is critically important. Think about ideology on an international scale. We think of capitalism, we think of communism, we think of socialism, we think of fascism. Well, what about ideology when it comes to policing in this country? There's two models that dominate criminal justice, and obviously Terry knows: crime control, due process. Depending on, crime control is more associated or affiliated or associated with conservative values, where due process is more associated with liberal values. Okay, depending on what ideology, which model you follow as an individual or as an organization, will affect the way you view people. Okay, and the way you treat people. Ideology is important. Racial and cultural intolerance is important. Nationalism. The reason I mention nationalism is because what happens is you get whipped up into this frenzy, this nationalistic frenzy. You wrap yourself around the flag. Okay, you tend to think as a group member, not an individual. Police officers do the same thing. Then, of course, there's these underlying group processes I want to talk about: benefits, cost, individualizing people, dehumanizing, which often happens, which allows for violence. When you de-individualize people, dehumanize, they become an object and not a person. So that's nonviolence. We'll talk about that. I want to talk about peaceful nonviolence and successful nonviolence movements. Gandhi's effort in India. Nelson Mandela in South Africa. The civil rights movement is a great example. Civil disobedience. We'll talk about Henry David Thoreau. I'm going to quote Henry David Thoreau here in a minute, because I think his essay on civil disobedience is great, and it kind of relates to some topics I'm going to talk about later. Of course, Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And then some other topics: conflict resolution, ethical and religious theory. I think it's very important that students understand sort of ethical and religious underpinnings of the peace movement. All right. I teach ethical theory for police officers in our criminal justice, as Terry does too. I'm a big, I guess, a fan of Kant, and so I really want to talk about this categorical imperative, treating people as an end and not a means, that sort of thing. I also want to talk a little bit about utilitarian theory, because there is some conflict there. Okay. On an individual basis, I can treat you as a person, but looking back more globally as a policy, how are we going to enact this policy, and who's going to benefit and who's not? Sort of a utilitarian sort of calculus that we use. all right? And the theory of double effect, which relates to utilitarian theory. The police role in conflict, now I'm going to bring the police in more directly. Okay, we'll talk about how the police were used during the civil rights era. You know, how they're being used internationally. Okay, how they're being used possibly in Syria. Egypt's a good example of the police and the military standing back, you know, letting the protest evolve, and peacefully and for the most part. Vietnam War protests, okay? We'll talk about how the police were used there. Kent State, you talked about that. That wasn't really a police issue, that was a National Guard issue, or a State Guard issue. But you had the Democratic Convention in Chicago. The police were highly involved in that. All right, so we can talk about that too. But, you know, also Rodney King and the riots that ensued. Okay, we can talk about that too. I'm not really keeping up with my notes here. So those are some of the major topics. I think I had a couple more there. Yeah, police and violence, we'll talk about that. What I want to point out here, police subculture again, community-oriented policing that have a model that's evolved over the last 20 to 30 years as an alternative to the traditional model of policing. We'll talk about that. Police transparency and accountability. Okay, that's very big. It's very important for the police maintaining some legitimacy in the eyes of the public. The President's Crime Commission, the role of police in a free society, we'll talk about that. And last, organizational theory. The two dominant theories when it comes to police and in criminal justice in general, contingency theory and institutional theory. The reason I want to bring those in is because it's important for people to understand why organizations act the way they do. My doctorate's in public affairs, so organizational theory is something I studied quite a bit. It's a public administration degree, so I'll talk a little bit about that and bring that in. Now, once I identified all these major topics, what I had to do was distill some major student learning outcomes. I identified 4, okay, and then associated evidence of learning, which is all going to be necessary for me to develop this course. The first one was students will describe religious and philosophical grounds for peace movements and their leaders. What I want to note here in particular, and I mentioned I was going to talk about Henry David Thoreau, something that's always struck me about organizations, especially bureaucratic organizations, is that they become very, they're rule-based, and people become hostage, or hostages, to rules, and they think like robots and not like men. And so Henry David Thoreau, writing his essay on civil disobedience, he was basically motivated by the America's conduct in the Mexican-American War. All right, he felt it was illegitimate. Okay, and he didn't want to pay his taxes. Okay, and he felt like people were marching off as wooden men into this combat without thinking. So in his essay, while comparing the mass of men who serve the state and the military to machines, as the police sometimes are compared to this being, Thoreau stated, in most cases there is no free exercise whatever of the judgment or the moral sense, but they put themselves on a level with wood and earth and stones. And wooden men can perhaps be manufactured that will serve that purpose as well. I just got this cough. But anyway, I think that's important because we don't want police officers to be machines. We want them to be men. We want them to be men first. Okay? And we want them to make decisions, be guided by their conscience. You know, what's right. And I thought that was a powerful statement. And what I want to emphasize with this outcome is that officers must act morally and conscientiously, even if that act is unpopular, and carries with it a negative personal consequence. In talking about police organizations, they're the sum of their parts, which means they're comprised of human beings. Okay, and I think Thoreau again nailed it pretty well when he was talking about corporations. Corporations could be any organization. I know there's a legal definition of a corporation, but if you look at a police organization as being similar to a corporation, you'll get this quote. He said, Thoreau added that it is truly said enough that a corporation has no conscience or conscientiousness, but a corporation with conscientious men is a corporation with a conscience. And so I think what I want to do here, and what Terry and I think are agreement on, is we want our students to appreciate the values of peace, okay? And we want them to ultimately not be a wooden man, not be someone who's following rules because they're rules. We want them to think about the justness of the rules too, okay, and look through this lens of peace and kind of adopt this sort of Kantian view of let's treat people as a person and not as a means to an end, okay. So that's one. The second one is I want to analyze causes of conflict on the global and national community, at the global, national, community, and interpersonal levels.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Your paper cuts off after major learning objectives and evidence of learning. Number one, students will describe religious and philosophical grounds for peace movement leaders. After that, there's nothing else.
Well, then I must have.
No, it's on the other page, it's on, it's in the last page. We'll just don't have it.
Oh, it's not in order.
Yeah, it's one, and then the font.
Thanks for saving me. All right. That's number two. Number three, students will describe and treat national and international civil protest, individual level encounters between the police and the public that resulted in violence. And the last one I consider to be the most important outcome, because what we want our students to do is to do something, okay? And what I want them to do here is envision an alternate model, okay? They're going to learn about organizational theory, okay? They're going to learn about community policing. They're going to learn about peace studies. They're going to get exposed to some ethics, okay? They're going to learn about police subculture. Now they've been exposed to all this, let's take this information, synthesize it, and come up with an alternative. And so that's going to be the final learning objective. It'll probably be a project. I think it'll probably be a group for me. And everyone who's teaching it can have their own way of assessing this. But for me, it'll be a group project. Okay, I want them to be creative and think outside the box. It doesn't have to be something that has to be implemented. Okay, but I want them to get the gears going and how to come up with an alternative that can affect the police. So those are the four major learning objectives. And working backwards, of course, I want a course description. You don't come up with a course description first, and that sort of develops on its own. But so I came up with my major topics, brainstormed. As I was reading, I would write them down. I kept an open document, and I would just write things down. And then I grouped them, and then I from that was able to distill these major learning outcomes. And from there, I was able to develop a course description. So that's where I'm at right now. And what I want to leave you with is a Dilbert cartoon again, because I like Dilbert. And Dogbert there goes up to his friend. I'm going to say master, that's too specific. I've been thinking about how wonderful it would be if all people renounced violence forever. That's great. And Dilbert swings around. That's a beautiful thought, Dogbert. Of course, Dogbert walks away. If no one else was violent, I could conquer the whole stupid planet with just a butter knife. And I say that tongue-in-cheek, sort of cynically, because I know that's how some people have this attitude because they see peace as weakness to be exploited.
Right.
But it's not a zero-sum game.
That's right.
Right? Everyone can enjoy peace, and that's really the ultimate goal in this course, is to promote that. So.
Nice.
Very good.
Any questions?
Terry, you're next.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't have a slideshow. I'm the passionate one that just sells anything that needs to be sold, and peace and justice is one of those that needs to be sold. I want to thank Rachel, and Ruth Prater's not here anymore, but the idea of sending us to Croc was just an absolutely phenomenal, eye-opening, enthusiastic. As Lee said, it's an experience that says there's direction. If you take a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all want to attain that idea of the top of self-actualization, where it's not about me, it's about the earth, it's about everybody else. And we all try to get there, especially going to college as teachers, as social services, whatever we do to help people. We're very good at Valencia doing that for the 16 years I've been here. I've never been at a university more than 5 years. I usually go teach somewhere for 5 years and move on as just a wandering spirit. But I've been here for 16 years because Valencia has embraced that idea that we care. I really believe that it's the best place to start. So the idea was that we find ourselves supposedly there. And then we start going, well, we didn't get a pay raise this year, and I got too many students, and they're cutting. We found ourselves back in that security needs. As we all discuss, if everybody can meet the basic needs, then there's less conflict. So if there's enough water for everybody, enough jobs for everybody, then we're pretty good at what we do. Well, the idea was all of us start finding ourselves back away from that ideal thought. And this refurbishes it. It takes it back to that. You come out of Croc going, yeah. It gives you the direction. And for those of us who are looking more Winnie the Pooh and Piglet and everybody into this idea, and part of that comes from, there's a great author called Benjamin Hoff, and he wrote The Tao of Pooh and the Tea of Piglet. It's an interesting way of looking at something through the eyes of Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh. And you just have to like Pooh. Pooh just does what Pooh does, and it seems to work out. Okay? So the idea was that from Croc, it gives you this inspiration of where you want to go. It gives you that idea. It reinfills what Gandhi had taught us, what Dr. King had taught us. And one of my most favorite quotes is from Dr. King, and it's an honest and just man must obey honest and just laws, but an honest and just man must disobey dishonest and unjust laws, i.e. the seeds of conflict. Okay? Now, how we handle that conflict's a different thing. But I also quote Yoda from Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, and I'm going to paraphrase it. You have Luke Skywalker, who's this young, cocky person, he's going to be the great war hero. And to paraphrase Yoda, he says, war heroes, a true hero would have prevented the war, which goes back to what we say. And then, of course, having been to war, not on my choice in Vietnam, I was drafted, and Canada was too cold, and I didn't think I had a prison personality, so I found myself at that point that, you know, one man's terrorists, another man's freedom fighters. It just depends how we look at it from that perspective. So the conference, I'm going to give you an idea of what Croc is like. Now, first of all, you may not like McDonald's. Support McDonald's. Because I wonder, what is Croc? Croc had a negative term like that's a crock. You know, it's another word, but it sort of didn't have a positive side. What is this Croc Institute? Ray Kroc, founder of McDonald's. It was his second wife that has been the biggest supporter. In fact, during this camp, and Rachel, those who've been there, it's basically camp. George runs it like a camp. It is the most fun, relaxing. He wears shorts and T-shirts, and the day we all get to wear our Croc T-shirt, it's fun for our pictures. But George ran it always as a camp, and so he was talking one night during a campfire. In the campfire, we had chocolates and graham crackers and the marshmallows, but we had a fake fire behind it. There's no real fire at Notre Dame. So we had the fake fire, and we were sitting there eating our chocolate and graham crackers. And so he started to tell the stories about the Kroc Institute. Let's get back to McDonald's. I'm not going to lose McDonald's for a second. And so therefore, she's been, Mrs. Ray Kroc's wife, second wife, has been very supportive. And he says he was talking to her one day when she flew in, and she was saying, how are your finances? And George would say, fine. She goes, well, how about $500,000 this year? And George said, he says, at first I was like, well, I was disappointed because normally she endows a lot more than that. And George says, she must have realized my look that I was a little hurt because she said, that's 500,000 shares of McDonald's, George. And George's first thought was, what's a share of McDonald's worth right now? So if you want to support McDonald's, it does filter back through all the way through. And one of the cute stories, because Croc has a lot of cute stuff to it, but it gives you an idea of where they're coming from. The other story was that when a Chinese student was over and he was getting his PhD in Peace and Justice, and they have one of the best PhD studies program, and masters and undergraduate and bachelors. In fact, their graduate students were more than helpful. They were doing everything they could for us, and the passion was there. He said the Chinese student went up to Mrs. Kroc because she happened to be on Notre Dame's campus. And he says, do you eat McDonald's?
Right.
And Mrs. Kroc said, I don't eat that stuff. And the Chinese student was a little offended, only because McDonald's is sort of new to China. They like it. It's a different type of Chinese, a different type of food for their culture. And George said about a month later he got a letter from Mrs. Kroc, and she apologized on behalf of the Chinese student, and she didn't mean to insult him. And maybe this check for $1 million will help ease the pain. So the idea is that there are some wonderful people from places we may not realize that are doing wonderful things for this concept. And Notre Dame in itself, and I'll give you a brief background so you know what Notre Dame is. It's a Catholic school, but it's not really heavy into Catholicism. Yes, it has statues of the Virgin Mary, statues of Jesus, and statues throughout the campus. But there's a statue just as big in bronze of Newt Rodney, because football brings in about $50 million to the University of Notre Dame. So football is very big, so you root for Notre Dame if you want to. It helps the Kroc Institute, it helps Notre Dame. Notre Dame has about 8,000 undergraduate students and about 3,000 graduate students. The campus is beautiful. There is not one grass misplaced, the tree, everything. It's a beautiful campus. It's a very enlightening campus to walk around and think. We were fortunate the weather was only in the 70s for a couple of the days. It was beautiful. They had a lot of summer camps with a lot of youth for tennis, for swimming, for soccer around. It's a very inspirational place. And everything adds up to what George and his other faculty and staff at the Kroc are doing. They're wonderful people. They're the who's who. They either are coming back from Rwanda, they've come back from Syria, they've come back from Egypt. They've all spent time somewhere to see what the reality of something was. And so it's a wonderful institute if you ever get the chance. And we're hoping that the new president is supportive as what Ruth was, because it's a wonderful, and I would like all of you to go. It is a wonderful thing. We had 53 of us. And where we were from, there were several from Paris, France. We had some from Russia or the Ukraine. We had some from Colorado. There were a lot of people from everywhere. But I want to bring up two people, Eric and Pete. And they were from Fort Collins University, which is in Colorado. And one was a geographer, the other was a geologist. And wonderful people, as everybody was there. And they had a very interesting point. As Lee and as James were saying, to branch out. Because in nursing, violence is what's really in the emergency room. It's violence. And violence is conflict. And so nursing needs to deal with that, as do all the different branches. And so I said, why geography and geography and geology? If we don't make peace with the earth, we'll never have peace with us. So it's that idea that we bring the environment in to have peace with that. So it's a wonderful institution. It's wonderful people. The discussions are there. The passion is there. And it offsets living. You have to live in the dorm. They do have a nice motel on campus, and there's some motels off. But you have to live in the dorm. Because you have to remember what 18-year-olds who are drunk, they can sleep on anything. It's sort of how it works. But the idea was that you sleep on a bunk bed. You actually, it's a bed. And the mattress, I'm not sure what it is. I don't know what that mattress is. Yeah, and I don't know what it is. It wasn't water. It wasn't styrofoam. I don't know what it was. Some type of plastic material. And the first night, you're realizing all you have is a sleeping room. It's a dorm room. Because the first year, all Notre Dame students have to live in the dorm. They have to live in the dorm. They have no fraternities or sororities. Their dorms are a fraternity and a sorority. Each dorm has its own color code, its own mascot, its own thought. And they compete within that like a fraternity or sorority system would. And by the second day, the bed's not as bad. And then the passion of everybody that is there, the passion. You forget about the bed. You really forget about the bed. It's very tolerable, especially when you think of what everything else that's going. So overall, I'm just going to wrap it up as a passion part. It's a wonderful. It revitalizes you. The Gandhis, the Yodas, the Dr. Kings, the Nelson Mandelas. Everybody comes out. So does Chief of Nespers. Everything that we've experienced here. And as a police officer that studied criminology, especially peacemaking, it reminded me of the Oprah show where a young man who was 12 wanted to meet a peacemaker before he died. It was a Make-A-Wish. And so Oprah arranged Jimmy Carter, who was a great peacemaker, to come on there. So the idea is that we can bring this back to Valencia. We have a wonderful people here, Osceola East. UCF has some wonderful people. Our students here are just fascinating. And they are wonderful. It's a great place. So I really think that what Rachel did, and she deserves a huge round of applause, for what Rachel and everybody else that started this procedure have done a wonderful thing. So I recommend it, even if it costs out of your own money. I would go again at a heartbeat. In fact, we're thinking about Camp 2, Camp 3, reunion. And the last thing that made me motivate was they have all the books that all their staff have written over the year. And what I said with George one day, I said, George, I want my book in that shelf. He says, well, only if you teach here. But what I will do is I will allow anybody who attends, their books will be on a separate shelf. And so when you walk into this idea, it's a wonderful thought, and it inspires you. So thank you, Rachel, and to thank all of you for what you're doing, because it's really making a difference.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone. I want to honor everyone's time because I know you have places to go. And if you want to linger here and ask questions, please do. But I do want to respect that I know y'all have meetings and classes to get to. Thank you to our presenters. There's much more conversation to be had. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks. Thank you.